Welcome. This is Mark Baer. You are watching the Joe Cupcake Chronicles. Today we are in Summer is Drunken, Part 2. Music by Arthur Barrow, original art by Norton Wisdom. Joe Cupcake is one of those people whose life is always seen as a movie in his own head. And one of the movies that he imagines is, imagine Frank Sinatra being reincarnated. And he ends up in somebody like Joe Cupcake, who can't sing, who can't dance, who can't carry a tune. And poor Frank, he's entrapped in this body, and the two of them need to work it out. So it could be a great buddy picture. I've mentioned that the Joe Cupcake Chronicles are, in a way, third-person autobiography. It's a way to try to tell the truth. And telling the truth isn't because we can't face who we are, although that's part of it, or our dark thoughts, or our fears, or just our imperfection. But part of telling the truth is how weird life is. I met a psychic whose job was channeling dead movie stars and getting their recipes, and she was making a living at this. And what a perfect job. They always showed up on time, they never complained, they never sued. And so in this, I thought, well, I'll try this, and then Joe Cupcake tries this. I would channel Charlie Chaplin and see what he had to say. He had a hard childhood. You never recover from this. He was a hard man, but what he had learned was pathos, which is what made him beautiful. He saw the comedy and he saw the tragedy, and he was able to express that. Joe believed there was a drive to create, much like the drive to touch the divine. Joe's heroes had always been artists. They were often bitter, broke, in dubious health, and never satisfied. They couldn't be anything else, didn't want to be anything else, and success usually brought only slightly more joy than failure. Their faith and their vision is what kept them going, and keeping faith was an ongoing struggle. But every once in a while, after the completion of a new work, before doubt and futility slipped in, there was that wow sensation of something fresh and unexpected. Marcel Duchamp said of Andy Warhol that it was not the painting of 50 soup cans that made him great, but the idea of painting 50 soup cans. It was the idea, the idea, the idea. It was the age of the idea, and Joe was full of them. Joe asked, if I could paint, what would I paint? He decided he would paint the illumined light of the everyday. Joe saw the Buddha light in a Texaco station bathroom in Gonzales, California. The sink, floor, and toilet were spotless, a tableau of what could be in a higher world. Joe saw the Buddha again at the rear entrance to a Chinese restaurant. There was a cardboard box with a blue Coors Light logo on it. The light fell on the blue lettering logo, and Joe thought, why not? Joe would definitely paint food. The colors in the James Rosenquist painting at the Seattle Art Museum were tempting enough to eat. The image was a dish rack filled with plates and glasses. The surface was flat and shiny. Rosenquist, once a billboard painter in the early 60s in New York, would paint a hamburger and the client from Cleveland would complain about the color of the mustard. Everybody was an expert. Finally, he got tired of standing 10 stories above the ground freezing his nuts off. He got a new racket, Pop. Would Joe have admired a Rosenquist billboard? Joe thought of James Rosenquist's F11 painting. There was an angel food cake, a Firestone tire, a young girl under a hairdryer, a nuclear explosion, a F-111 fighter jet, all painted in bright colors, but the most alluring image was the spaghetti. So true to Joe's childhood diet that he wanted to jab a fork into it. Joe had rules for the camera. It must always be with you. It must become an appendage. Pull over if you see the shot. Don't be lazy. The light comes and it goes just as quickly. Cherish the light. Commit to the light. He had been photographing balloons, inspired by something his wife said, how she was the grounded one and he was, well, after he wrote these rules, he left his house without his camera. Balloons were everywhere. Joe lost his car keys. He was late, and he frantically searched his pockets. No keys, but a dry, months-old peach pit swaddled in a napkin. How wonderfully surreal, he thought as he held out his prize to his wife. She was not impressed. He didn't bother to show her that weird thing that looked like a dog's toenail that he found in his other pocket. Art. How much can you get away with? What can you do and still keep a straight face? What can you do no one else would think of? If I deem it art, does it make it art? Yes, every square inch. A layer of clouds broken with square patterns, leaving a mosaic on the water. The last watercolors of the day were still visible on the fading sky. Seek transcendence in whatever form it happens to take. It doesn't matter if God exists. It only matters if you see God. In Joe's garden, it was all sex. He could feel pulsing life, scent the perfumes that inspired the bees. A hummingbird fluttered and spread pollen, and the iris, with labia-like blossoms, were quivering, and the phallic century plant had spurted some 20 feet high in a matter of days. Joe loved nudes, especially erotic nudes. However, when it came to shooting nudes, Joe was reduced to finding evocative forms in fruits and vegetables. His wife wouldn't pose for him with her clothes on, so there was no chance with her clothes off. And although he never asked, Joe suspected she would frown upon his inviting the neighbors over to pose nude. Maybe if he had some spiffy camera gear with lights, but he didn't. So nudes were out, and Joe would never be the next Mapplethorpe. Joe dreamed he was at a gallery show called Concupiscence. Pinned on the wall were ladies' panties, painted with delicate oriental patterns, and across the gallery were silken scarves with similar iconography. While looking at the panties, Joe noticed one pair in particular and exclaimed, "I remember those." On his Facebook page, people appeared who Joe hadn't spoken to in years. He never participated, never volunteered that he was brushing his teeth or sipping his third espresso of the day, and so he was amazed that he had such an active virtual life. Why not completely drop out? Seems his life went on fine without him. This thought really hit home when Joe got an email reminder that it was his friend's birthday. Did he want to send a reply? Joe did, but he doubted it would do much good, being that his friend had been dead for 3 months. Joe turned to his friend's painting on his wall. It was alive, as if the painter's very essence was on the canvas. Was this immortality? And if so, would there be any joy for the departed? Immortality is overrated, thought Joe, but maybe it is all there is. In honor of his friend's birthday, Joe opened a volume of Proust and read the passage concerning the death of Bergat. They buried him, but all through that night of mourning, in the lighted shop windows, his books, arranged 3 by 3, kept vigil like angels with outspread wings, and seemed for him who was no more the symbol of his resurrection. In Joe's living room, things appeared normal out his window. Flowers in bloom, and beyond that, the blue of the ocean. The woman said, "We're like glass balls on a table. All is well, and then the table tilts and life shatters. It happens suddenly, wham! And normal is just an illusion." Her daughter, in a stable marriage for 7 years, a new baby, then homeless and on the street. A car accident, her daughter driving, a passenger hurt, possible jail time. It could happen to any of us, like balls rolling off a table. What's it all about, Alfie? Is it just for the moment we live? Joe was a watcher, a witness, a listener. He never liked to make it up. He liked to bundle stories together until a pattern emerged, some whole that illuminated the parts. Joe liked catching fragments of conversation in airports or bank lines, eavesdropping on why the check bounced or why the bank wouldn't waive the exorbitant overdraft fee. At a party, he heard his real estate broker say, "We're going biking in Italy, unless I need to have an operation to remove my kidney to give to my brother." Joe loved this kind of dialogue, almost unbelievable but true. His friend Eddie's mother, "Oh yes, we've been fixing the house and planting all new plants and waiting for the sale of the land to go through, and oh, my sister's up on a murder charge in Australia." And credit Joe's wife's horse trader for this pearl. "So I saw these 2 old bags coming down the path, and I realized I was looking at $50,000 worth of plastic surgery riding on a golf cart." Twilight hour, Indian blue. Joe closed his eyes and let the sound come out of him, beginning with a long Joe was experiencing the past, present, and future all at once. Our personal Bible is dense, years reduced to single sentences. In his dream bazaar, souvenirs from the collective unconscious were laid out next to bins of yellowing postcards. Mothers and apple pies and everyday objects took on new meaning. Joe saw an albino giraffe and a Midwest harvest moon in October. He roamed an ancient Middle Eastern bazaar with camels and men wearing fez hats, turned a corner and encountered friends forgotten and friends never known that came with the picture frame. The dead and the living mingled together with old gods tossed out on the junk heap of time. What are these memories all for, he wondered. And how many temples down do I need to dig? And what do I do with the dirt? Joe became mesmerized by the sound of a calliope and entered a white room with a breeze blowing through. Colored dust, like painted desert sand, uncannily held itself in shape. It could all collapse, the whole cockamamie dance, back to dust, but how the light transformed the spinning particles into glowing jewels, twirling and sparkling reds, yellows, blues, swirling patterns. Could be something, could be nothing. And how fast the sand shifted as clock hands circled and recircled while clouds streaked across the sky above the open ceiling. The music echoed his kaleidoscopic vision, a siren song, and as he embraced it, the sound bent like a river of quicksilver. When the sound stopped, Joe said, "Stop." He opened his eyes. In the distance, hawks were circling in and out of a cloud. They seemed a specter, ghost-like, then real, in and out of the cloud, black against the sky, and then grayish-white. Joe jotted notes on separate cocktail napkins. The universe is a blank slate. Whatever God there is lives inside us. Loneliness is separation from self. There are no wrong notes, according to Thelonious Monk. Bliss is running towards what you love as fast as you can go. Joe, man of mystery, left doodles in his notebook he could later barely decipher or remember his exact state of mind at the time of the writing. One said, "Drinking more with Rumi plus Bloody Mary plus Kettle One." Let us start with some Rumi. In your light, I learn how to love. In your beauty, how to make poems. You dance inside my chest where no one sees you, but sometimes I do, and that sight becomes this art. Okay, now let's explain drinking more. That was Joe's New Year's resolution last year, and perhaps he would give it another go this year. Joe found he was lacking even when it came to keeping up with his vices. He wanted to drink more. He wanted to drink earlier in the day, but with one thing or another, he just never got to it. Rumi fit into the story because Joe was searching for some sort of enlightenment. In this case, in the form of the perfect Bloody Mary. Joe built this sturdy drink with all the fixings: pepper and Tabasco, a squeeze of lemon, a dash of Worcestershire, a stalk of celery, celery salt, and V8 juice. As to the Kettle One part, it's a perfectly good vodka, and truth in advertising, Joe did drink it. But he was thinking about how to blend advertising into his musings. Somebody would have to pay if he was going to drink more. For his second installment of the Kettle One campaign, or Your Brand Here, Joe quoted Dorothy Parker. "I love a martini, 2 at the most, 3 I'm under the table, 4 I'm under the host." Joe didn't need 4, but picture him in his living room, martini glass in hand, slightly wobbly, in pajamas, and wearing a scuba mask, then an ominous voiceover. "Down in the deep, the mind plays tricks, the knees wobble. There are hallucinations, and you laugh at strange things. I speak of the rapture of the deep, nitrogen narcosis. I speak of Martini's Law, where 200 feet down feels like 4 martinis. Blub, blub, blub. You are blotto and carefree, with a buzzing in the ears. Keep your wits. You will need them to get to the surface. That's it. Joe, swim. Easy. That's it. Slowly, slowly. Don't want the bends." Shift of camera angle to Joe's point of view as he experiences the rapture of the deep in his living room. Fish float by his picture window. He swishes about his living room, getting into the swim of it, telling himself, "This is good, this is good." As the last embers in the fireplace flicker, Joe fears running out of air. He hears music, and as the singing gets louder, he realizes it is coming out of his mouth. He doesn't panic. He's trained and follows the air bubbles to the bar, where there will be a product shot. "What a bold adventurer I am," says Joe, avoiding a couch, a chair, a table, and a lamp. His wife, awoken by the drunken singing, moves towards him like a slow, cartwheeling starfish and beckons him to his bed. He dog paddles in her direction through warm, enveloping waters. Blub, blub, blub. Joe dreamed he was somewhere tropical. On the coral reef, it was feeding time. He recognized many of the fish: banded humbug, clownfish, dash-dot goatfish, Moorish idol, many spotted sweetlip, painted flute mouth. He thought he might take to wearing bow ties and wondered if there was a golf course on this resort. When he heard banging and clanging, "Damn, Wednesday, garbage trucks," and he had forgotten to put out his cans. Joe didn't believe in anything supernatural. There are no words. The mystery is great. The universe is vast. Life is short. Reverence is due. Everyone's God cannot be right. Even if it is written, all stories are not true. Joe's God was a laughing God, and if such a God was to be made flesh, he would be Charlie Chaplin. Joe met a psychic who had a gig writing a monthly magazine column where she interviewed dead movie stars. Joe thought, what a great deal. No travel, no trouble with interfering handlers, no scheduling conflicts, and no libel suits. Joe figured he might be able to get into the psychic game himself. So Joe channeled Charlie Chaplin and asked him if he ever totally recovered from his Dickensian childhood. Charlie replied, "There are some things you never recover from. When my mother could no longer take care of my brother and myself, we were sent to a workhouse. One never forgets battling cold and hunger. I felt anything good could be taken away from me. But the ability to comprehend pathos is a gift, and I learned early that tragedy and comedy went together. I was a hard child, a hard man, but I tried to give voice to the voiceless, hope to the hopeless, and dignity to those who had felt the yoke of oppression." Joe wasn't sure if it was really Charlie talking, but as soon as he finished his transmission, he got an email from the psychic. He was impressed. Do anything, but let it produce joy. Do anything, but let it yield ecstasy. It started earlier that day. He was in his kitchen talking to himself, not unusual, until he poured the wine and realized he'd poured 2 glasses, one for each voice. Joe liked the idea of a nonstop party. He wrote, "Last night I won money in my sleep." That had to be a cause for optimism. Joe, dreaming of France, thought about Dick and Nicole Diver, the protagonists of Tender as the Night. Joe didn't think of Dick as a psychiatrist like he was in the novel, but as Fitzgerald, the writer. Nicole Diver was probably like Zelda Fitzgerald, on the verge of the schizophrenia that would overtake her. It was not a good book, but it was a book Joe was happy to live in, especially the diver's house on the French Riviera. He would stroll down to Nicole's hillside garden overlooking the Mediterranean, where she clipped flowers and left them by the side of the bed for the gardener to gather up and arrange. Joe would admire her nasturtiums and iris, haphazardly planted as though sprung from a careless handful of seeds. Joe would embrace the sea smell, the scent of tomatoes, the cry of the birds, and the crash of breaking waves. Recently, Joe started rereading the book Ending First. The ending was grim. Dick lost his youth, lost his wife, lost his wife's money, and ended up in some small town in upstate New York. But F. Scott's word pictures were so beautiful, and his shimmering surfaces so alluring, that in Joe's mind, Dick lost none of his charm. From his balcony, Dick Diver shouts to his wife with a megaphone. He wants to throw a party where a fight breaks out and lovers quarrel and someone passes out in the bathroom. He would invite inappropriate guests and watch the pot boil. Yeah, Joe knew the feeling. It was August, and Joe was marooned in silence and wanted noise. Joe slipped back to the south of France, back to another age, exchanged some lively repartee with artists, adventurers, and various idle rich milling about before sauntering over to an inebriated Abe North, a has-been Broadway composer who slouched at a piano set out on the patio. Joe, now clad in his tux and retro dark glasses, recognized the house from the 1962 movie adaptation and looked down at the shore described in the opening scene as a bright tan prayer rug of a beach. He thought of the disgraced and beaten Dick Diver in the penultimate scene looking down from the same balcony one last time. He raised his right hand and with a papal cross, he blessed the beach from the high terrace. Abe, letting go an arpeggio of dissonant melancholy chords, painted the mood. Joe liked how Abe made being buzzed in the afternoon seem irresistible. The Divers could be amusing, and their dramas made for juicy gossip. There was the big showdown where Tommy Barba and the new lover forced a confrontation in a hair salon. Nicole's hair was half cut and Dick was half shaved, an almost cubist image. How long would Tommy, the soldier of fortune turned stockbroker turned playboy, excite Nicole? And could Tommy deal with a crackpot? She did grab the steering wheel of Dick's car and cause him to drive off the road, her children in the backseat almost getting them killed, and then laughed. That's some serious psycho mojo. Joe shamelessly flirted with the actress and homewrecker, Rosemary Hoyt, who would think to herself, "At last I've been to a wild party." Rosemary, a girl that looked like something blooming, saw out her window a tree strapped to the back of a truck and thought of it as a lovely person in an undignified position, and identified with the tree, and all at once, everything looked gorgeous. Joe loved the color of the book, real and emotional. Dick and Rosemary, lovers riding in a taxi. The green and cream twilight faded, and the fire-red, gas-blue, ghost-green signs began to shine smokily through the tranquil rain. At a dinner party, the table seemed to be floating in a dark universe, leaving the guests completely alone, except for each other. Nicole Diver enters the cafe. Nicole's sky blue suit, like a stray segment of the weather outside. Maybe it was time for Joe to start his great American novel. He wrote, "A wart, a nose, and a blast of sour breath." Joe waited for more, but none came.